Welcome back to the Frontier Faith podcast. We are excited to share with you our special guest as we have Joel Warner with us this afternoon, or evening, or morning, whenever you may be listening to this podcast. Joel's a good friend of ours, and he is a evangelist and preacher in Sitka, Alaska, a very storied and iconic Alaska place, postcard location of Alaska. And so, Joel, so grateful to have you on the show this morning.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Or afternoon or evening or whenever you may be listening to this. Yeah, super glad you're here. Joel, go ahead and help everyone get to know you a little bit. Where are you from? Let's start with that.
Where am I from?
Yes, your origin.
That's a good question.
Is that loaded?
That's a little bit more loaded because I moved around quite a bit when I was growing up. So I like to tell people that I'm from Texas, kind of all over Texas. I grew up my early years in the Rio Grande Valley, 4 or 5 miles from Mexico, down the tip of Texas, very southern tip. And then middle school, we moved around West Texas, Central Texas. And then I wound up in high school, doing high school in East Texas, about 20 miles north of Houston, in a little town called Cleveland, Texas. Not too many people know about it, but most people know where Houston is. Now, funny, we were talking earlier about where we lived in Texas. The only place I haven't lived is North Texas. So
a lot of Texas.
So then how did you end up in the bigger state?
Much.
A person said the wrong thing to me over dinner. He said, "Oh, anytime you come to Alaska, you just come on." He didn't speak. That's a terrible accent. It's supposed to be an Eastern European accent, but that was terrible. And he didn't speak 100% great English. But I don't know. A year later, I was in a tight spot. My conflict with the person I was contracting with, the conflict being no money being paid.
It's important.
So I said, forget y'all. I'm going to pack my bags and go to Alaska because I know somebody.
Wow.
Somebody I had met one time and had dinner with who said the wrong thing. So I packed a duffel bag and a backpack. And after I got done, I had $500 in my bank account, and I came to Alaska.
And when was this?
Yeah.
That was, that's a good question. 2010, maybe?
Okay.
And how old were you when you moved up here?
5 plus 18.
So you're 23.
Maybe, yeah, 23, 24, something like that.
So then 2 questions then. How did you come to find and follow Jesus? And then how did you find yourself as an evangelist?
I grew up in the church. And so from a very young age, I had a lot of really, really knowledgeable mentors, knowledgeable in the text and how it plays out and things. And that made a big influence in my life. And then as I got towards high school age, I eventually made that more permanent commitment. And it was in a smaller congregation that had been big at one point, and they needed some help song leading. And so being the choir guy that I was, and he sings, let him do it. So, and I was happy to do it. I was on fire. I wanted to be involved. And so that's where that started. And then it went from song leading to, why don't you lead a class or things like that after a while. And and then preaching. And then I was part-time preaching, just on and off for a long time. Even before I came to Alaska, I'd fill in, do things like that. And then I came to Alaska, and I didn't really preach very much actually until 2015, maybe something like that. I wanted to be more involved. I didn't tell you the whole story why I came to Alaska. There's only 2 reasons people come to Alaska. I don't know if you know this or not. You're either running from something, like the police, or you're running to something, this Alaska dream. And I was running to something, but I was also running away from something. It wasn't the police, but it was drugs and alcohol and that sort of lifestyle.
Yeah.
Not hardcore, but enough that it was affecting my functioning daily and my relationships with people and things. And so I said, well, if I just go up there, I won't know anybody and I'll be able to just cure myself, right?
How'd that go?
That didn't happen, of course.
It followed you?
Several, yes, several years later, and with some spiritual instruction from the church there in Funny River, I was able to move past some of those things. And of course, I met my future wife there, and that made a big difference when she said she wouldn't marry me unless I gave some of the things up.
Wow.
So, that makes a big difference.
Sure does.
So, yeah, that was when I started to become more involved and get back into doing some preaching and things.
And let's see, now how many children do you guys have?
We went in the space of 6 months, no, a year. We went from 1 child to 4.
Wow.
And we didn't have twins or triplets. We have 4 children. We have 2 biological children and two adopted children, and it's been a great journey. And of course, during that time period, if you don't know, Sitka is a very small congregation. We went from that 1 child, my oldest child, who was 3 at the time. In our congregation, we had that 1 child. We went from 1 to 8 in the space of 6 months to a year.
Wow.
So it's been a huge blessing. Yeah.
So growing up, I mean, you said the way you described your faith journey, kind of a gradual song leading and then preaching some and things like that. Was there a moment, maybe it was up here, like you were like, I'm going to go all in on this?
Yes. I would like to think that it was purely good motive that produced that urge. But there was definitely an element of something that I told my wife when we first got married. It was, sometimes you tend to tell each other preconditions. Like her precondition for me was stopping doing these things. My precondition for her, and I only had one, was I'm not done moving and traveling and seeing the world. If you want to come along, that's great. If you don't, you can stay at home with the white picket fence, but I got to go. And we'll make it work somehow, but I got to go. And she said, well, I'll just come with you.
Nice.
Careful what you say. Because within 2 years or 3 years, we had bought a sailboat and we were preparing to do missionary work in the South Pacific. So that's how I roll.
Yeah.
You don't just go halfway. you just go all in.
Wow.
So that's
So you got the boat, and then how did you land in Sitka as a family and doing ministry there?
Yeah, so that's part of the story too. So we bought the boat and I brought it up from Ketchikan across the Gulf of Alaska. If you don't know, it's fairly treacherous waters. The engine only didn't start one time. Not a big deal. It was a very big deal, but we'll skip that for right now. We took it to Seward because that was the closest harbor that had decent facilities, and then we continued to work in Soldotna. And the idea was I was going to get the boat ready to go to the South Pacific. Well, I realized that there's decent facilities in Seward, but there's a lot better facilities elsewhere, like Seattle and places like that. So the idea was we were building a house also. The idea is finish building the house. Literally, we were pounding nails. Finish building the house, sell the house, take the boat down to Seattle, outfit it, and then go. And we only made it halfway. Robin Berry, right? Robin Berry from church in Soldotna. He's in Louisiana now, but they moved out, I don't know, more than that. Yeah. Ooh, getting old. He mentioned, he came in the store where I was working and he mentioned, I told him the story, all proud, right? We're going to South Pacific, going to do missionary work, going to do this on fire thing. He just looked at me like, well, why are you going all the way down there? Sitka needs somebody right here.
Mm.
And I went, what? That's not in the plan, Robin. Like, I got things to do.
Mhm.
You know, I'll check into it. Maybe I could help them for a little while.
Mhm.
So I called them up. They said they really needed somebody. And I came, and that, 2 to 3 year hitch that I was thinking about staying and revitalizing things and getting things back up and running has turned into, what did we decide, 7, 8 years now?
Mhm.
Wow.
So that's where we're at with that one. And still going to make it to the South Pacific. I promise you.
You know, who
Maybe on an airplane, but
you remind me a lot of Paul. You know, like, I'm going to go here. Spirit says, no.
yeah. That's exactly what happened. I left out a critical part of that story that actually has that element to it. I was working at the store. Robin Berry comes in. He tells me those things. And I'm like, Robin, you don't understand. I'm putting in my 2 weeks notice here, like in a couple weeks.
Mhm.
And he's like, oh, all right, just check into it. And so we go from full steam ahead South Pacific to Sitka in the space of like a week. Or no, I got the timing wrong. My bad. I had just put in my 2 weeks notice.
Oh, wow.
And I said, no, I already have plans. I know where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try and help them out on the way.
Wow.
But yeah, the Lord had other plans.
That's right.
I remember you in the middle of that zeal to go to the South Pacific, and I remember it was about this time of the year, 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, it was about when I
because
quit.
it was around our lectureship time, and you had heard about some of our travels to South Africa, my motorcycle trip, and you're thinking you needed someone to go on the boat with you to go down to the South Pacific and then help you sail down there. And it was going to be several month journey, and then our wives then meet up with us down there, and then fly back. And you're just looking for someone adventurous to go with you. And I remember thinking and praying like, now, the motorcycle trip to Texas from Alaska, that was adventurous, but this is like several like miles higher of epicness. And then I find it really really entertaining to see how the Lord was like, you got the right ocean. Pacific, correct? Let's start. Let's
North Pacific.
Let's start with the north.
Yeah, instead of 4,000 miles, you make it 400 miles.
That's right.
But I love that willingness to go, and also the humility, and to a degree, to be guided to then Sitka, that you then don't kick against God and put your head down and just go where you want to go, but that you see his guiding hand in that this is his mission, not our mission. Okay. And that's really encouraging to see.
Gotta say, I respect the willingness to imitate Paul as he imitates Christ, but he does shipwreck, so maybe we can avoid that one. But everything else, solid. So describe Sitka. One of the things we've mentioned is Alaska. It's one state, but man, you go to different regions, it's so different. I've actually never been to Sitka or even that part of Alaska.
I've tried to get you to Sitka.
I'll repent.
Mike always comes, so he's greedy.
I know.
I am. I love Sitka. I'd go there in a heartbeat.
Sitka was one of the first major fur trading outposts that the Russians, when they were colonizing the area, put in.
Mm-hmm.
And
1700, 1800s?
1700s, yeah. Or early. And so they put in this is skipping over a lot of history there, because they show up and try and take some land and enslave some natives, and that doesn't really work out, and they get a whooping. And so they have to leave and come back with more guns to put down the natives there, and do some horrible things to the native population there. That's another whole story. But after the Russians colonize, then eventually it becomes the capital of the Russian American company. Their what's the word I'm looking? Not consignment. Their land that they had been granted via the empire, the Russian Empire, and when Seward actually buys the Alaska Territory, what we call the Alaska Territory because we're on the American side of it, from the Russian American company, that transfer actually takes place there in Sitka. And so Sitka was the first capital of the territory, and the capital, it was at that point, when it was first established, was called New Archangelisk, something like that. Anyway, New Archangel, essentially, because the dominant religion that they brought with them was, of course, Orthodoxy, or what we would call Russian Orthodoxy, because they sort of have their own brand of it. And yes, so from a very early time, contact with the Western world, Christianity was a part of the equation there, and that was positive and negative because of the people who were involved and the good and the bad things that people do. But Sitka still retains a lot of that history. Like there's the Russian bishop's house where he stayed is a National Historic Landmark, and so you can go and you can do a tour through that. The Orthodox cathedral is there. They're no longer under the Russian Patriarchy anymore. I think they're American Orthodox, whatever the hierarchy there is. And so there's still a lot of flavor of the history there in town, but there's definitely a mix of a lot of modern. What's the word I'm looking for? There's a modern flavor to the town as well. It has a very Northwest feel, like Seattle type of feel. There's a young, hip sort of vibe there too. We get a lot of people who come via AmeriCorps volunteers, people who are Jesuit volunteers, various volunteer organizations, national and international, that come there to volunteer their time to work with schools and different things. Remember I said the nonprofit scene there is like
everywhere.
More nonprofits per capita than anywhere else in the state. And so everybody's got something that they're trying to do.
Interesting.
In Sitka. It's a happening place.
How many people live in, what's the population of Sitka?
Permanent residents, I think it's around 8,000.
And then during summer tourism and fishing?
It can fluctuate more than that, but not a ton. It's not like Seward that like completely empties out during the winter, but there is some seasonality there. There's quite a bit of transient sort of labor that's involved, whether it's DOT road work or whatever. They hire a lot of crews, and then they only work during the summer, like for fishing and other things as well. And then there is the largest employer on the island is actually the hospital, because we have what they're trying to make into a regional hospital that would serve then all the villages that are all up and down the coastline on the inside passage. And it's a Southeast Alaska Regional Health Consortium. So it's SEARCH, but the H and the C are backwards. And it's actually a native run deal, and they provide an amazing level of care for what you would never expect to be in a community of 8,000 people on an island.
Wow.
That's not to say it's the best care out there ever, because various factors. One of them is it's very difficult to find employees that are willing to commit long term. Remember I said it's transient. So they have a lot of doctors and nurses that are on contract that come to visit us, and sometimes we benefit from that too in the church, because folks from down south come up and we're able to fellowship with them.
So you've been preaching there with your family for coming up 7-ish
Mhm.
years. And from what I remember conversations off and on throughout the years, you moved there on your boat, right? You didn't initially have a place to stay, so your family,
Well, that was the place to
you
stay.
lived on your boat
We didn't have
and
the kids.
your
Yeah.
sailboat,
BC.
and so
BC.
so you guys lived in your boat
Yeah.
and then preached there at the building and worked there, and then a few years later you then ended up moving into a portion of the building there.
Yeah. About a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. We were living on the boat because it's the cheapest place to live in town. There is tons, and I mean, Southeast is one of the least populated areas per square mile
Mhm.
of places in Alaska. The heavy but there is it's not able to be developed because of the national forest and different things.
Mhm.
And Sitka is the same way. And so since they ain't making any more land,
Pretty boxed in.
land is very limited there.
Sure.
And so to buy a house is very, very expensive.
Right.
Talking like Seattle level prices.
Wow.
Maybe not quite downtown Seattle prices, but very high.
Sure. And so you also recently, I think this is really interesting, your family started a daycare also. And tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about that.
We have an in-home daycare. We're licensed. We're technically a group home, which is like one step above the basic level home daycare.
Okay.
And we're licensed to care for up to 12 kids. And yeah, we definitely don't want 12 daycare kids at one time. That would be a lot, even for me and Jeanette, because we have 4 of our own kids,
Mhm.
and we generally have 4 or 5 daycare kids, and that's already 9. Plus, we have bonus kids that we live one block away from the elementary school. So, somebody from church, can't pick up their kid till 4 o'clock. They come stay with us, and so that actually counts towards our license when we're open.
Mm.
So we have to be careful about that as well. So we keep it to about 5 kids maximum.
Does that open up opportunities of connection in the community, or does that
It does. Yeah, it does. We've had a number of our clients that have come worshiped with us for a while. Yeah, and especially with the children, because we don't try and hide. I mean, the name of our daycare is Little Blessings. It's implied that we are faith-based,
Yeah.
not organizationally wise, but that we have a faith-based like curriculum that we try to
Mhm.
And it's in the
hold
building.
to. Well, we live in the downstairs, so it's in our home.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we call the downstairs our home. And because it gets really weird when you're trying to explain to somebody, where do you live? Oh, well, I live over here. So it's
Yeah.
much easier to say this is just my home, because that's what it is. We're living in the downstairs of the building. We have the whole downstairs for our home. And then upstairs is what you might, if we're going to use churchy words, the sanctuary, or, the where we worship most of the time. I say most of the time because frequently, and especially on Wednesday nights, we have Bible study in our home.
That's
And
cool.
Home church.
So yes, that's exactly right. And I think there is some huge benefits to it.
Absolutely.
And because of the intergenerational sort of play that happens.
Yeah.
Older folks who sometimes feel isolated and separated from the rest of the group because we're not, we're having the adult class, or we're having the whatever class. They don't get to interact meaningfully in a study with children very much, and I think that is a shame.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I make an effort to make that happen at least once a week.
Oh, yeah.
Where we are.
I think the importance of like letting the children come to me, like that type of overlap in with the teacher, that type
Yeah.
the community spiritually has that intergenerational presence with each other, relationship with each other is really beautiful. So how personally would you say, what are some big lessons you've learned in the years of ministry, and how would you say have been some like big growing moments or growing steps the Lord has led you through in ministry?
I started something during COVID, and I feel really strongly that I should have finished it. And so I would encourage, just from my own experience, that if you get an opportunity to study at a higher academic level, something, to go ahead and go for it and try and finish it all the way,
Mm.
because there's times in your life, like during COVID, when we're sitting around with our hands tied. Not really, but we have more time on our hands,
Mm-hmm.
and those times don't always come around,
Right.
because they're not around now.
Right.
And I wish I had it back so I could finish that, Greek class, so I could finish that whatever class. And so that's something that I had to learn the hard way when I was, 'cause I essentially was a new preacher, maybe 2-3 years worth of experience at that point. And
And you didn't have any formal training up to that point?
I don't know, not from a accredited institution. Remember I said,
You had some mentors?
growing up, I had mentors, but we actually had classes where I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley at our church about how to conduct a Bible class,
Nice.
how to preach a lesson, how to do those things. So I had several years of more like vocational instruction sort
Yeah.
of deal. And then, like I said, these people were known for studying. So this was not like when you went to Bible class, you didn't get to sit there and be quiet in the back, because it was, Joel, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
So
it was good.
during COVID, where were these classes done through?
Oh, online, yeah.
With a university or with?
It's WVBS, World Video Bible School, was
Yeah.
a thing that really kind of piqued my interest, because then I could do it whenever.
Mm-hmm.
And I did some of that, and then I looked into some of the Amaridge stuff, but I
Mhm.
never really committed to finishing anything. And that was something that I really, looking back on it, here we are, 2025. I had to look.
Yeah.
4 years later, could have had something substantial there to show for it, and I don't.
Mhm.
So I feel like that's something that if you're a young preacher or a young person, if you have the opportunity to go ahead and seize it, because I had it and I halfway seized it and got distracted and did other things. And
Yeah.
Yeah, if the Lord gives you a season to go into Arabia, go for it.
Yeah.
Nice. So, what are some things you guys are currently studying or talking about in Sitka?
The big formational thing for the past, I don't know, we've been doing this for like 6 months now. One of those studies that because I didn't go into it with a formal, 13 lesson plan that's going to come out in a quarter, type of deal. It's lasted 6 months, but it's been very, very good. We've been studying on Wednesday nights spiritual beings and their role in creation and in the Bible, and how that actually lays the context for what we see in the Bible. Because when you think of the first creatures in the Bible, what do you think of?
The first creatures in the Bible?
Yeah, Genesis chapter 1, right?
Think of, I mean, the spirits were created, I believe, before that, but you have, the fish and the birds and the.
That's generally what we think of with creatures. But when you actually dive down into things and you see how the writers of the Bible viewed the world around them, they saw spiritual forces behind lots of things. And they saw, especially stars in the sky, of course, what I'm referring to, as representations of spiritual beings, whether or not, that's, the heavenly host.
Right.
And so when I read that, and after studying this spiritual being thing, when he puts the host in the sky, they would have understood it as that's the spiritual beings.
Yeah, stars seem to be very symbolic or synonymous with angels or spirits, the day star, morning star. So that's exciting, and that's learning about spiritual beings. I was hoping that was something we could, touch on in this episode, and definitely have an ongoing conversation about it. So share with us, if you will, just kind of some overview of the subject and how it's been enlightening or equipping for the saints in Sitka and hopefully even now further out.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I led off with when we started the study was, what do you know about the spiritual beings in the Bible? And the answer is, well, angels, right? Demons. So that's a good start. And what about all of those other spiritual beings? And you get this blank stare, like, well, you mean the ones in Revelation, like the weird ones?
I have a virus in my computer, I'm pretty sure it's a demon.
Yeah.
Or some other spiritual goblin, gremlin.
And
just kidding.
The answer is, when you're studying the Bible, we study it in English. And I don't want to claim, because I'm not a Hebrew scholar or anything.
Got to finish that class.
But, well, that was one of the ones I started too. There's a bigger cast of characters other than just Yahweh God and humans. And of course, we know angels and demons, but there's a general category that's referred to in Hebrew as the Elohim. And when you realize that that's a category title and not a specific being necessarily that they're talking about, then you realize that there is something bigger there that they're referencing. And you get hints of it all throughout. I mean, just on your shirt, you got Deuteronomy chapter 32 there. You get hints of it in Deuteronomy 32 because you got the sons of God there. Well, some versions say the sons of Israel because that's sort of an interpolation that you get from the Masoretic text. But there's some really good evidence to show that should be translated as the sons of God. And what does that mean? Who are the sons of God? Well,
kind of like the scene of Job, where you have like this arena and audience and conversation.
Yeah, and then you got other big questions. I mean, like serious theological questions, like why does God need a staff team?
Yeah.
He doesn't. Why does he need help making these decisions? And there's some serious questions there that you have to put the work in to try and find out the answer. And when you do, it, in my opinion, it's very rewarding because it shows that God is not the God of deism. He doesn't, spin the top and let it keep spinning. He doesn't wind the clock up and just let it go. He's actively involved with his creation. And it also shows a spiritual reality that is behind the current reality. And whereas most modern folk wouldn't want to assign a personality to that, right? We don't, demons. No, sorry, I don't. There definitely is some spiritual evil that is behind the world today, but also back then. And when we can realize that is influencing everything around us, I mean, our government, the way we live our lives, the power structures that we ascribe to or that we put our faith in, instead of God. That's for lectureship lesson. But when our modern conception of those things is, what's the word? Wanting.
Yeah.
It's like a desert. It's parched. It's not a complete picture.
There's a real lack of sobriety, I think, amongst people with thinking about being sober-minded. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion. And, on one hand, the idea of spiritual beings and that there's other players on the stage of life,
real players on the stage,
and you can have one extreme where you become like a spiritual conspiracy theorist, and
there's a demon under there,
and like
every rock,
and the devil made me do it, and there's an over attributing to spiritual things, and then tinfoil hat levels of just of over attributing. And then there's, like you're describing, kind of a flippant disregard
Yeah.
where you're like, that's not real. And I think that's where the sober-minded and watchfulness comes in, where they are very much a part of this dynamic, this life, this arena that we find ourselves in, and they have a place, and the scriptures give us some insight to that. And so I'm curious as to, and as your studies show that insight.
Some part of this discussion requires a healthy understanding of what this book that we call the Bible is and what it's intending to do. I think it's some of the things you're hinting at, because you reference Genesis 1, and what are the creatures first mentioned? Well, the first two verses, when you think about, so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's like a huge category. This is a thing that happened. The earth, it says in English, you said we're reading English, but the earth was without form and void. But in Hebrew, there's a vav at the beginning where it's like, and the earth, or as for the earth. In other words,
Tohu vavohu.
this is intentionally writing from the perspective of an earthling like
a
us,
dirt creature
like us, right? So it assumes that there is creational activity and purposes in the heavens as well. It doesn't describe everything. It doesn't tell us all the backstory, because that's not our story. Like, this is our story. And there's the scripture is going a certain direction, right? But all throughout scripture, you have this flavor of there's other players in the story that God is using to accomplish his purposes.
Yeah, and that you mentioned where the story is going, and I think that's why I get back to Genesis 1 so often, is because after God appoints the heavenly hosts to do what? What do they do? The heavenly hosts? They rule over the skies, right? These heavenly hosts. Well, he appoints humans to rule over something as well, right? He appoints us to rule over the earth. And so this Adam, who's made from Adamah, the dirt, right? This Adam is given the role of ruling over earth in the place of God. It's not that God can't rule over the earth. It's that he chose us to do it, co-ruling with him through his life and through his love. And I don't know if you read page 3, but that don't work out. So
Exactly.
Because and so it's like a big twist in the narrative that instead of ruling over the earth himself, he puts somebody else in his place.
Right.
And
which really draws out of that royal imagery of image.
Yeah, and I think that I didn't bring my Bible. Let me bring it up real quick. Psalm 8 really talks about that.
Mm-hmm.
And
is that what is man that you're mindful of him? That psalm?
How majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Like, that's where we think of glory being the super glory.
Mm-hmm.
Super glory. Keep on going down. Works of your hands, your fingers, moon, stars, you've set them in their place. Who is man that you are mindful of him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings. Okay, that's the ESV. Heavenly beings, and crowned him with glory and honor. The glory that's supposed to be up there and the honor that's up there, he is sharing with us here. And we're talking about the direction that we're supposed to be going and those sorts of things. And to me, it's all there in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Because it shows us the direction that God intends for us to go. He wants us to go, and what's the first thing he tells us to do in chapter 1, 27? Go forth, be fruitful, and multiply. And I would say to you, being fruitful does not mean equal having children.
What?
And I would say multiplying is not always having children. It definitely includes that idea for sure. But being fruitful means having concerts. It means coming together as a community to have a barn dance. It means living together in a way that is beautiful and life-giving, and not something that takes away life. That's what I would submit to you being fruitful is. And it's all right there on page 1. We haven't even left page 1 yet.
Yeah.
So
Nice. Those are good thoughts. Well, I find it encouraging just that scriptures give us, not all the answers pertaining to these spiritual entities, but enough insight to have some way to navigate life with knowing how to interact with them, or at least to some degree of their role, at least to us, because scriptures kind of has a perspective of from a human's perspective, and it shows us kind of our beginning and God's interaction with us. But God is a creator, and God is there's a lot God has done that we don't know about. I think of just in the Gospel of John, where John talks about all the things that Jesus did. If everything was written down, there's not enough books on the planet to contain all that Jesus did, and that's just in his 33 years on Earth. Thinking about all that God has ever done. You just look at the universe and how many galaxies and things we'll never get to go to or see, or so many things are out of sight, literally. Like they've moved so far away that because of the speed of light and limitations, there's just so much of creation that's just like is deliberately like out of bounds to humanity. And I think that's just show us, the heavens declare the works of his hands, where God's showing us, I'm the creator, no one else is the creator, and he's helping create a scale and a scope for us to have a wisdom of knowing our place in his creation, and that there's only one creator, and that there are these spirits, there's these other entities, but there is none like him, and he is the uncreated one, and all other things are created. And to know God's creative nature never turns off. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And him being creator is just a completely defining trait for him that continues to trickle down into all the other things that he does.
there's a part of the story, of course, that I only sort of halfway referenced in terms of spiritual beings and how they influence us, and that is, of course, the snake in the room, not the elephant in the room, who is a representation there of the first rebellious spiritual creature. That's what I would say he is. And of course, we're told later then in Revelation, that who that is.
Mm-hmm.
But the first spiritual rebellion that we see then is this snake in the garden, and he doesn't use a magic wand. He doesn't shoot stars out of his finger like a Disney movie with power. What does he use?
Words.
Influence and words. And so we shouldn't be surprised today when we look in our own life and we look at our own actions and we see something whispering in our ear, that you can't really do that.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never do that. You'll never be good enough. You'll have those little whispers, whether it's overt from somebody or in your own mind. And we need to realize where those thoughts and those things are coming from.
That's why it's called the deceiver, deception.
Yeah. And the Satan is
But and that those intrusive thoughts we have might not only come from our subconscious, but that there is another entity that is injecting or influencing or communicating to us.
Has some sort of influence over us.
And the exact mechanism of how that happens, I don't know personally, but it's so important to know that, with our own evil desires that we can be enticed with, this tempter, this deceiver, this adversary, there's a negative evil participant in this struggle that's going to get removed eventually, but is a real factor in our lives.
And so, well, let me pose a question. What was he tempting them to do. Why was he not why? What was he trying to get them to do besides just eat the fruit, right? That's how he did it. What was he trying to get them to do? What was the purpose?
Well, the lie was to become like God,
Mm-hmm.
was kind of the objective being dangled before them.
So what does become like God mean, though? We've just talked about God and its glory and its majesty. What's he do? He creates things. He reigns over them. He wants humans to reign, to see themselves as God, essentially, like you said, who are in charge and who are reigning. That's the big lie, because they already are reigning, because he put them there to rule over the earth through his glory already. And that's part of the big lie. And the reason, when we realize that plays into today, because what's the lie that he's telling us? That God doesn't really rule, or that you can rule if you just.
So a great example of this, I think, is King Nebuchadnezzar. You see in
Yeah.
Daniel, where he looks out and says, "Look at everything that I've done with my own hands," and so he turns into a beast, right? And I remember preaching and teaching through Daniel years ago, and coming across one commentator saying, the way he put it, I thought, I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. What the punishment for Nebuchadnezzar was really on the outside transforming into what he already was on the inside. And the only difference between us and the beasts of the field is that we are created in the image of God. And when we fail to reflect God's glory, when we fail to point back to God as creator, and we take on that royal status, as you're saying, and look what I've done, look who I am, and that pride as that puffs up, I mean, then we're just like no other animal, right? And so he becomes what he already is on the inside, and then of course when he comes out of that, he glorifies God in turn. But just the idea of the that's a manifestation of that great lie we see in Genesis 3.
It's getting divine power, but on your own terms.
Right.
God has given us the power already through his spirit and through other means to rule over the land here, that we're supposed to make this a place of beauty, a place that Genesis chapter 1 verse 26, right, is fruitful and that we multiply on. And that multiply word carries so much meaning. It's not just having babies. I mean, maybe that's not so obvious, but because that's the way I was taught growing up, because in kids class, they teach you the simple version, all those sorts of things. And I didn't really realize in those days to have more children means what? You have to feed them. You have to clothe them. They're a huge, huge investment for you to have more children. And
it's like community and civilization, kind of baked into that. And fruitful and multiply, if those just meant reproduction, then that's kind of redundant to say fruitful and multiply.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some reasonableness, I think, in that. And I'm going back to your talking about taking advantage of your time to study and your degree in classes. I just was thinking in the back of my mind this whole time that, Jeff, I don't think I've known you not in school all these years since we've been in high school. I think when you were working construction for a year or two up here, were you also online when you were in Anchorage?
That's when I started my master's.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. So I actually have never known you not in school my entire life.
I've never known me not in school, too. Pre-K? I'm excited to take advantage of not school.
So he got stuck in school.
Yeah.
But to your subject, Joel, with this spiritual beings, some ignorance on my part that I just laugh about with Jeff when he a few years ago was telling me that he was beginning his new degree and it's his doctorate in ministry, but it's called a demon.
Demon
degree.
Yeah.
I had never heard exactly that term before.
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
wasn't paying attention. So he's like, "Yeah, I'm getting my demon degree." I'm like, "You're getting a degree in demons?"
He was so excited.
A demonologist?
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
whoa, that's
Had to
like
let him
so
down quickly.
metal. And so when you had mentioned that this was something that you guys have been studying, it made me think back of this demon degree. But this is a wonderful subject and a rich subject, and very pertinent to a lot of things, more than I think most people grasp. And I'm excited I think we need to further talk about this. But I would like to read Ephesians 3, verse 10 to show listeners and for us as well to know that this is not a fringe subject per se. There's some ambiguity to it. There's some unknowns to a degree to it, and that's it's a mystery rather to it. But to show that this is not a fringe subject matter, Ephesians 3:10 says that through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. And so just to show that the players on the stage of the spiritual realms, the authorities, these entities, that the church has a purpose in God to communicate to them God's total wisdom. And so I'm just thinking of like Job once again, that dynamic of your life is not just about your interactions with God in an isolated bubble, but that your life is a testimony, a showcase of God's grace, God's wisdom, God's power, and that there's more being communicated than just things to your neighbor from your actions. That there's a much bigger arena that we are operating in. It kind of helps create the right scope. I think Satan would love us to think that our lives are inconsequential, in that we're very isolated, and the scriptures help us zoom out way further than we were really kind of prepared for instinctually.
Yeah, and we can approach that evil, whether you want to call it spiritual realm or the evil that's around us. We can approach that with boldness and access with confidence to God through our faith in Him. That's verse 12 there in chapter 3. And verse 11 says that that was the purpose of why Jesus came.
Right.
It says, this was according to the eternal purpose that He realized in Christ Jesus our Lord. Jesus came to fight the principalities and the powers of the air, the evil spiritual realm.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that. And when you think about God's wrath and God's anger, I think it's so important for people to recognize that God's major beef is with Satan, not with man. And hell is a place prepared for Satan and his angels. And humans, if they become in league with Satan, will go with him to there. But humans are designed to be with God forever, and a place prepared for us is a mansion with many rooms. And humans our destiny is to be made in His image and to be with Him forever. And so these spiritual players have a place in that they allow a side to be chosen with us.
And one of the things that Ephesians really draws out, what you just wrote, but really the whole book, is just that Jesus changes everything, and we have no reason to be afraid. What I love, Paul's prayer and hope for his readers at the end of chapter 1, he says, I want the eyes of your heart to be enlightened towards a handful of things. But one of the things he mentions is several sections in Ephesians in Greek is like one sentence.
I was going to say, isn't chapter 1 sentence?
Yeah, exactly. But just kind of jumping in, one of the things he says he wants the church to know in verse 19 is the immeasurable greatness of His power towards us who believe, according to the working of His great might that He worked in Christ when He raised Him from the dead and seated Him at His right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rule, authority. And so, like, both the resurrection of Jesus changes everything and the enthronement of Jesus changes everything. But what's amazing about it is that it's not just some high theology for us to know. He says, when he talks about our salvation in chapter 2, to God, verse 4, being rich in mercy because of the great love with which He loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with Him and seated us with Him in the heavenly places.
Right now.
We have been raised, and we have been enthroned with Christ. We've been seated with Christ. So he not only conquers death, but he also conquers evil. And so there's a lot of questions we might have with some of these things, but the one thing we do know that has been clearly revealed, the mystery of Christ has been revealed, is that Christ is enthroned,
The already.
and nobody's taking him off that throne, and he has seated us with him.
And the exciting implications of that is what we see in James of like resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he'll draw near to you. And before that curtain was torn, before Christ had paid that price, there was a different spiritual dynamic with man and with these entities, and where Satan was allowed and usurping to possess people, to have dominion over certain people, but now you can resist him and he flees. And that's not because we're just so awesomely self-controlled now. It's because Christ is reigning and we can draw near to him in a way that we couldn't before. And because of what Christ has accomplished, he has completely restructured the spiritual world. And that Satan is still he's a defeated dragon looking to devour. Again, like we see in Revelation, he is still at work, but his workings have changed because of what Christ. But he's still a player on the board, but the arena, the rules have graciously been altered.
Grace.
Because of
James
Christ.
4 verse 6. But he gives more grace
Yeah.
to us.
Yeah.
So as we kind of come towards the end of this episode, I know this has been and will continue to be a rich study for the church there, and is a rich study for all of us. But as we're just thinking about the church in general, but the congregation in Sitka, I mean, what are some things that the church, the listeners, that we can be praying for? What do you see on the horizon? What's God up to?
Couple things that we're constantly in prayer for. We're a very small group, and constantly praying for courage and wisdom to take the message out into a community that is I don't want to say hostile, because they're not hostile. You can't be hostile because we're on an island, and I have to see you next week and the week after and the week after. So there is not a lot of aggressive, in your face type stuff.
That's funny.
But for courage and wisdom to take the word out into a community that has in the past embraced Christianity. I think at one point there was over 20 different congregations in town of 8,000 people. Did you catch that? 8,000 people, 20 congregations of people who call themselves believers. And now it's waning, and it's waning very, very quickly. But I will say that I've seen a change, and I think I don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole, so stop me if I get too deep. But my analysis of the situation is that postmodernism has played itself out, and enough people have torn down enough things that now there is a deep hunger and search for meaning, because we've torn everything down and we have nothing to replace it.
Yes.
And if you want to look it up, metamodernism is the name for that. So, but I truly believe that we're seeing that right now, and that we could be in the midst of a great revitalization, not just in Sitka, but in the church in general. And so we need people to come help us and encourage us. When I say us, I mean me. And so we have a room there in the building that is dedicated for people who are working with the church. And so if you'd like to contact us, sitkachurch@gmail.com. We don't take everybody, but especially if you're somebody who has already done that sort of thing, we'd like to have you short term, long term.
Awesome. Well, we love you, Joel, and we're excited for what the Lord's doing in Sitka, and we're going to be in prayer for you and everyone involved, and Lord willing, we'll get to be there with you for some time and use that room, and hopefully get other workers in the field and help participate in the sending and the going of to Sitka and Alaska and the world. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Tomorrow we have a 5-hour drive to Homer, and we're all riding together.
We're up north now, yeah.
And so I'm pretty sure this conversation will continue tomorrow.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah. Well, if we just record the whole thing and put that up unabridged, would be wild. But thank you everyone for participating in this episode, and we love having guests on here like you, Joel, and we hope to have more on in the future. And the Lord is at work in many places, and God doesn't take days off. And excited to see Him at work in so many different locations and helping guide us and giving us wisdom. And we want to eagerly pray for more wisdom every moment, and thankfully He generously gives. So again, thank you for participating. Pray for Joel, pray for Sitka, and pray about joining the work yourself more and more every day. And we'll see you guys next time.